Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Work Smarter with Dynamics 365 Finance Automation. My name is Colin Schofield, and I'm a Finance Acceleration Associate here at Avantiico. We're excited to have you with us as we explore how accounting teams can reduce manual work, improve accuracy, and unlock more value from their Microsoft investment using the automation tools already included in Dynamics 365 Finance. I'm joined today by Brandon Nash, our Senior D365 Finance Consultant and Head of D365 Finance Delivery here at Avantiico. Brandon has led countless D365 Finance implementations and optimizations, specializing in helping organizations streamline and automate their financial operations. He'll be walking you through today's demonstrations and showing you how the standard automation modules in D365 Finance can transform day-to-day accounting. Today's session is about showing you how Dynamics 365 Finance helps accounting teams work smarter by leveraging automation built into the system, aka included in your standard D365 FNSCM subscription. We'll start with a quick look at why automation matters in the first place and some of the challenges we still see across finance teams. From there, we'll walk you through three key automation areas that come standard with D365 Finance: AP automation, AR automation, and advanced bank reconciliation. Brandon will take you through live demos of each of these so you can see how they reduce manual entry, eliminate delays, improve accuracy, and ultimately make day-to-day operations run much smoother. Along the way, we'll share examples of how organizations are using these tools today to cut processing time, reduce costs, giving teams more time to focus on strategic work. And once we wrap up the demos, we'll close with some key takeaways and move into a live Q&A where you'll have the chance to ask questions and learn what it looks like to get started with these D365 modules in your own environment. Before we dive in, here's a quick look at the other webinars we have coming up. First, join us on December 9th this year at 10 a.m. Pacific Time for Dynamics 365 FNSCM licensing updates. What's changed and what's next? In this live session, we'll walk you through the latest updates on D365 FNSCM licensing, including postponed enforcement rules and what that means for your organization. We'll get actionable guidance on auditing license usage, tightening security rules, and avoiding costly compliance surprises. Hosted by Morten Lukstrup, our D365 licensing and database expert, and featuring insights from the Avantiico team, this session will help you stay compliant and cost efficient. And beyond that, keep an eye out for more events to be announced soon, including our upcoming session on the D365 FNSCM 10.0.461 version update. We're also planning an exciting in-person event in Q1, which we'll be sharing more details about shortly, so stay tuned for that. Lastly, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout this session. We'll be sure to answer them either as they come in during the Q&A or following up with you directly via email. And without further ado, Brandon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Colin. Really appreciate it. Let's get started right with the presentation. Like Colin said, I'm a senior finance solution architect here at Avantiico, and we'll be going through all of our different functions here in terms of automation, finance automation within D365. We'll talk about the AP, OCR, invoice automation, able to bring vendor invoices into your system autonomously and having that go through your invoicing process. Then we'll go through the collections process automation in terms of credit and collections and how that ties into AR. And then we'll wrap it all up with a bank reconciliation automation demonstration and just kind of talk through what all this looks like and how you can have your team be more proactive and less reactionary in D365 using some of the out-of-box tools that I've listed here. So with that being said, let's jump right into invoice capture and AP automation. The key to the AP automation is the OCR tool, or the optical character recognition function, using Power Automate as well as AP invoice automation functions in D365. As you can see here in the screenshot, the process starts off where your vendor is going to be sending you some invoices, and maybe you request that they send you invoices to a centralized email location. And within the OCR properties, you can define how you want to receive those invoices. You can receive them through email. You can also have them come directly into SharePoint, or you can use some form of Power Automate and Power Automate workflow with your Power Apps to be able to move them from that centralized email to another location like SharePoint or OneDrive. Then built within the Power Automate features within D365, you have the AI builder. So that is what allows you to, or allows the system to be able to read your PDF or the document that you get from your vendor and being able to construct that PDF into an invoice that eventually goes into D365. Once that invoice comes into D365, now you have the capabilities of the standard AP invoicing functions as well as payment proposal features that allow the system to process that so your team can go about their business during the day without having to monitor what's happening with that invoice. And so what you see here is once that OCR process occurs, now we have a series of batch jobs and configurations that allow a system to do 2 to 3-way matching if that's part of your business process. Subsequently, send that invoice to workflow where it can then get approved. And once it gets approved or it gets rejected, further processing can happen before payment is expected to be made. So basically, when you have the OCR and AP invoice workflow happening in conjunction with each other, now all your team has to do in terms of touching the system when it comes to managing this process is approving the workflow for those designated users or managing the approval process within the system. Once it gets approved, now you have your batch job that will create your payment proposal. And when that payment proposal happens, now we just want to be able to post a payment. So you're really just having two touch points in the system when it comes to managing the AP invoice workflow process from end to end, starting with OCR, recognition, bringing it into the system, and then vendor invoice automation. And so basically what we have now is we have less time required managing those vendor invoices. We can minimize how we do our 2 to 3-way matching process if you have that within your system. And then you have automated workflows for user review. And then when those automated workflows happen, that's when you come into the system. As an accountant, as accountants in the past that I've worked with, while the automation of the vendor invoice approval process is convenient, it's not realistic because, accounting teams and finance teams want to be able to touch the invoice, review it, and make sure it's compliant in terms of financial dimensions and all those kinds of things. The last piece I want to mention in terms of OCR and the AP automation tool is something that we have worked on internally at Avantiico, where we have now been able to advance the AP invoicing workflow from the OCR tool in Power Automate. So the Power Automate tool is great. It does a great job identifying the PDFs and when they come in and being able to create them. But there's also some limitations in the standard function having to do with financial dimensions and being able to manage the invoice directly in the OCR engine. We have a piece that you can follow up with me afterwards to talk about how our team has managed that process and made it a little more streamlined to enhance the current OCR function in D365. So with that being said, I'm going to go right into our demo and I'm going to walk you through this process of how the automation piece happens within D365, coupled with what's going on behind the scenes in Power Automate. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to send an email with simulating basically your vendor sending the invoice to your email and having the process kick off and update your invoice. So one of the first things I have right here I want to show is I have a purchase order that's been created and the process has already been received within D365. So bear with me here while I go into my other area. I'm going to just kick off an email. So in this case, you would be having your vendor send an email to your, company at ap.com or something like that. Second. So what I'm doing in the background right now, just so you can see, is I'm putting together an email that is going to be sent to my inbox, which basically simulate you receiving an invoice into an invoice PDF document into your inbox. bear with us here. Okay. Okay. All right. So what's expected to happen if I go into my invoice capture area, and you'll see this happen relatively quickly. Okay, so as you can see here, let me pop this up. So what has first occurred is I've received this vendor invoice. So this here is my invoice that has come into D365. And now I have a Power Automate flow that's going to take this invoice, this PDF, and it's going to send it to my workflow or send it to my SharePoint site. So this invoice right here for $12,918. Okay, so automatically that email, that invoice has gone to my email, and now it has gone to my SharePoint folder just through my simple Power Automate workflow that is eventually going to bring it here into my OCR engine for my received files. So now you can see right here, the invoice without, and you have to also remember that this process is going to be happening in the background. So when it comes to demonstrations like these where we have to kind of move things along, I'm going to be showing you some different screens and different inputs, but in your day-to-day activities, you wouldn't be monitoring the system like this. You would just have the invoice come in. As you can see, it's gone through SharePoint and it's gone through it's gone into OCR. And now, as you can see, this is processing in the background. So in reality, you would be going into D365, doing your day-to-day things, getting things set up, processing transactions, viewing reports, while all of this invoicing and processing is happening in the background. And so what's expected to happen is once this uh, invoice for PO 279 gets refreshed, it's going to come into our captured invoices area once this gets completed. So as you can see here, now it's been removed, and now it's showing up here in my captured invoices area, and it's now in processing. And what we're going to expect to see is once this goes through processing, it's going to be transferred into D365. So outside of me clicking the refresh button a couple of times and sending the invoice to simulate how you're going to receive this, all of this is happening in the background without anyone having to touch or manage the invoice up to this point. Okay. So while that's happening in the background, I'm just going to take a duplicate of this and move this off to the side. Because what I want to be able to have you recognize is what's going to happen here is there's a series of batch jobs that are going to run. So now it's awaiting. So there's a series of batch jobs that are going to run in the background once this comes into D365. So this OCR piece right here in which we're looking at basically has captured my invoice. So this is my document that has been received into the OCR engine. So this is the AI builder that I was talking about in that first PowerPoint slide. We received it into our channel, which in this case was our email going directly to SharePoint via Power Automate. Now we have the system creating the invoice based on the information that was shown in this PDF. And because vendors are going to send you invoices in various forms, you can train the system to recognize what the quantity is, what the amount is, based on how you set up your OCR. Okay. So we'll let that just continue to process and bear with it while it happens in the background.
And if there are any questions up to this point, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A section, and be happy to address those as they come.
Yes, please. Thank you, Colin. All right, let me go to my process automations. Still waiting. Sometimes it takes a little while, first couple of times when you kickstarting the day, but bear with me here, people. Thank you. If you do have any questions, please let me know. There we go. Okay, so now you can see here our invoice has been transferred from from the OCR engine into D365. So basically what this has done is it has come over here. So now let's go into our AP pending vendor invoices area. So now you can see here we have our invoice. So it has come into our pending vendor invoices area. And again, not something that you necessarily need to come in and track. As you can see in here, we have the system is going to automatically run the matching, attach the product receipt to it, and so on. And when you go and click inside the invoice, when it comes time to review, you'll be able to see the details that have been associated with this. Okay. So let me. Okay. Okay, so now let's run the other processes, right, we have in here. So now we've got a process that's going to happen in the background. Okay, and this process I have to kick off, and this is the process. These are the batch jobs that are going to be running in the background. One of them is to match the product receipts, and that happens. Basically, you're required to run it every hour. So you can't change it to set it up to have it run every minute. Otherwise, I would have had it running every minute, so that way it would run kind of on cue. But nonetheless, we have to work with the system that we have, and we'll do just that. So I've kickstarted this batch job. What's going to happen is it's going to match my product receipt or assign the product receipt to this account. Oh, last match status failed. Let's try that again. It's taking about a minute or two here for the batch job to run. But again, the key takeaway for this process is that you're going to be not just sitting here watching the system spin and run. The whole idea is that the system will run on its own while your matching process and all of this is taking place in the background. Trying to get this batch job to trigger. Oh, Okay, let me go back to my view. I thought I had this set to be defined. Okay, so now you can see here, it's aligned my product receipt to my invoice. And so the automated receipt matching status has been completed. Okay. So now we want the system to do the matching of the 2 to 3-way matching, however that may happen. So we're going to do and run this batch job. Again, the batch jobs just take a minute or so to run once they kickstart for the day. And that's basically what we're waiting on. So again, if you turn your head from the invoices and you're working on stuff day to day, this is not normally, sitting here waiting for this to happen and kick off. This is automatically happening. So that way, when you come in here, you eventually get your workflow to recognize that it's been completed. So we'll let that invoicing happen, or the 2 to 3-way matching happen. Okay. Let's go back and come back in. Okay. So in some situations, maybe this match, I'm not sure why this here has failed. It should have automatically passed, but nonetheless, let me take a look at my valid invoice matching just to see my results. Okay, matching validation was completed. Okay, so in this case, we'll send it to workflow. And one of the challenges in terms of doing the demonstration in this regard is that when the matching is happening, you want to make sure that your vendor invoice is closed. So when you're doing this testing on your own, you can keep the vendor invoice closed and have your batch jobs running in the background. So as you can see, what I have here and what's happening here in the background is me just running the batch jobs that get triggered for vendor invoices, transferring them from the invoice capture here into D365 and doing the matching as well. So as you can see, I just kickstarted this batch job to go off at 24 minutes, and it's 10:25. So it's kind of running in the background right now. So now you can see here, it's been automatically submitted to workflow. The last match status updated to passed. And now we can see that we have some workflow, and this is going to, right? I would potentially, if I were not sitting here in the system, I would get a notification that a workflow has been assigned to me. So basically, when you come into the system and this stuff happens, again, the OCR engine brings it in. You come in and sign up for your day, and you can see that you have a workflow automatically assigned to you. And you technically would not have had to kick off batch jobs or any of that because they're in the background working for you. And that's the automation piece that's really important to take away. So once I have this pending vendor invoice assigned to me or assigned to my user, again, you're able to come in here, click on the pending vendor invoice, see that everything has passed and is associated with it, and then you have the visual that matches your transactional information in the system. And that's the key piece, is your first piece of touching this when it comes to end users is the workflow approval process. So let me go ahead and approve this workflow. You can always add comments. If you're familiar with D365, you can put comments in, and those comments show up in your vendor invoice or workflow history. And now once these are set and done, you can have the system automatically post the vendor invoice if you wanted to, depending on your workflow setup, or you can manually do it. Again, once the approval process happens, again, that's just one particular step in terms of the automation of it. Is the first time you're touching this and seeing it and having to manage it is at the approval process and not having to create the invoice and so on. So as you can see here, now that I've refreshed it, the invoice is no longer showing up. My filter, let me change my filter back to my view. And now we have no longer a pending vendor invoice. And the reason why we don't have that pending vendor invoice, a little late, but that's okay. Let me go back and double check my pending vendor invoices. Okay, so if it's not in pending, it should be in my area for my vendor. There we go. Okay, so now you can see here the transaction has been posted. So now I have my invoice has been posted. The last piece that needs to happen is the payment being created. And what we want to be able to do in terms of automation is have the system create our payment journals for us when we do our payment run, whether that be a payment run at the end of the week, in the midweek, or on a daily basis at the end of your day. You have the processes in place to be able to do that. So if I go to my accounts payable process automations, and I'll just show this one on the fly because it'll happen relatively quickly. Let me just click the edit button and set this to not run at 10:41, but to have it run at 10 o'clock a.m. and set that to next and finish. Okay. So again, batch jobs that you're not going to have to manually update. I just want you to bear in mind in terms of the demonstration, a live demonstration, having to kick these things off. Otherwise, they would be happening in the background. So you imagine your batch job is scheduled to run, like I said, on a certain day or a certain time of the week or whatever the case may be, and this would run in the background. And what we're expecting to happen is we're expecting to have a payment journal automatically created for my vendor. So when I go into my AP area and go to my vendor payment journal, bear with me here. So as you can see here, it's executing. And what's happening in the background, oh, not that one. Is we're going to be expecting to see a vendor payment journal get created when this goes from executing to completed. Okay. So we'll just refresh, wait for that to complete. And once this goes to completed, we'll be able to go and see that vendor payment journal get automatically created. So here we can click on view payments, lines, And now we can see we have our payment journal created for automatically for our vendor. So in this particular case, now we can see that all we've technically had to do in terms of the users is approve the workflow. It automatically got posted just because of the rule that I had in place that once it got reviewed, then it got posted, and that's part of the standard workflow. And now the payment journal gets created. So at the end of the day, when I come into my payment journal, I can trust that the system has all of my payments lined up as I expect them to see. In this case, I want to generate a check number. So I'll generate a payment and say, okay. And okay, sorry about that. So that just prints a check, and not saying that everyone uses checks, so this is just the simplest way to go ahead and do this. To also this is also going to be part of our bank reconciliation process in a moment. So just bear with me here. Oh, well, we don't have to worry about that since we're not testing how to print checks. The most important thing is to show that we have a check number and that we have the amount and it's set to sent. So I can actually post this check and I can post this payment. And once that payment gets posted, now we have an end-to-end piece for our OCR AP automation functions. And so just to highlight basically where we're at here in terms of the demonstration is we've been able to have the system automatically send us when our vendors send us an invoice, we have the capability to have that invoice received to a centralized email, then be able to have that get processed within the system without us having to manage it or touch it, especially if we don't have any errors when it gets received in the OCR. Once it gets received in the OCR, it gets processed into D365, and through that vendor invoice AP automation process, even though I had to click a couple of things and wait on some things to happen, the whole idea is that that process is going to happen on its own. So when you come back after an hour, when the product receipt matching and the product receipt assignment and two and three-way matching process has completed in the background, then your invoices are ready to go. And that's by using a combination of standard D365, Power Automate workflows, as well as your Power Apps. And then having the vendor invoices automatically processed in the system without user intervention. Same thing with your vendor payment journals that are ready for posting. Now you have a fully autonomous end-to-end AP invoicing as well as payment process that requires basically 2 intervention steps by your users. If there's no questions in the background, I'm going to keep on moving and picking up with our collections process automation in terms of credit and collections for your customers.
Did just get a question in, Brandon.
Sure thing.
Yeah, could you please clarify how the integration between Outlook and the invoice capture OCR engine is configured? Is this setup performed within the invoice capture application itself, or is it handled through a Power Automate flow that forwards the email PDF attachments to Power Automate for processing?
That's an excellent question, and I had that same thing before preparing and getting ready for this. But it basically is configured through your Power Apps using Power Automate, right? So you have here, I have my vendor invoice email to SharePoint, and I have some functionality happening in the background. So basically, I've created my Power Automate flow, and these are my trigger, and I have my trigger points. So when I have it monitoring my email. So when a new email arrives, it goes and there's some configuration that's happening in here in both of these places. And I'm telling it to look for and apply it to attachments. I have conditions that are put in place. So this is a combination of being able to be knowledgeable and familiar and comfortable creating your Power Automate workflow and potentially using some other Power Automate or Power App in order to manage this process. So as you can see, I'm telling the system that when my vendor invoice arrives into my email, right? And I've got some configurations in here looking for attachments. I have a particular subject that I want to put a filter on, and it only captures those attachments. Then once it does that, it's looking to see if I have an attachment. Yes, then create a file. If I don't have an attachment, then no, send me an email because maybe my vendor forgot to send the attachment or something like that. And it's monitoring the email. So then once that happens and it goes into my email, now I have this other AP invoice email channel from SharePoint. So this is also where it's looking. So there's a couple of different configurations that are happening, right? Once it happens, it creates the file in SharePoint, it gets the file, and it calls the document receiver. So there's a couple of different things that are happening in the background outside of OCR and D365 that you do have to be familiar with and have to take into account when you want to have that go fully autonomous without you having to do any manual touching outside of the approval workflow and the payment posting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, Lakshmi said, thank you for the detailed explanation. And we have an
Awesome.
additional question, but for the sake of time, I think we might leave that for the Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what you saw in the Power Automate piece is also going to be reflective in bank reconciliation. It'll be kind of the same process, but we'll come back to that in a minute and we'll make sure that we leave some time for that question to be answered because I know those are really important as Microsoft is pushing us to be more autonomous in terms of Copilot and AI agentic functions. But let's continue in terms of collections process automation. So here in collections process automation, we have the ability to configure the system to manage our communications with our customers and giving you an option to have your collections agent engage or not engage. Excuse me. For the sake of this demonstration, the goal is to be able to have the system communicate directly to your customers so your collections agents can spend more time on value-added activities, when it comes to their day-to-day requirements of their day-to-day activities, whether it's managing or updating in reports, reporting to the business, or doing some other features and functions for their day-to-day tasks. Having to follow up with consistent customers that are not paying their balances is not something that someone has to do physically. Now, in this particular screenshot, you do have an action to actively, reach out to the client. So if you have a customer and you have a particular relationship with them, you can do that. But the whole goal of the collections process automation piece is that you can define a strategy within the system to allow you to communicate with your customers. And you can have the system do that automatically. So in this particular case, maybe instead of having a phone call, you just have the system send your customer an email, letting them know that their invoices are past due or that they have a past due balance. And then from there, you can have the system send collection letters until they either go to collections and you block their account or you receive that expected payment. Either way, the whole idea is that you have an expectation that your customer is going to pay their balance, and when they don't do it, it's not something that has to be at the top of the daily task because you can trust that your system is doing it for you. And when it's doing it for you, you have the capability to set that up and go through the process. So let's just jump right into D365 and talk about what that looks like. And we'll do a couple of processes. We won't go to the end, full end to end. Well, maybe we will, depending on how we're doing. I know we're wrapping up at like 11:15, so I want to still have some time to go through the bank reconciliation piece. So where I'm going to go is I'm going to go into the credit and collections area and go to collections process setup. So this is where you define the strategy that you want to use to communicate to your clients. And in this case, what I have set up, and I'm not going to go through each particular field and drain the details of all the configurations and collections, but by all means, please feel free to send me an email or follow up if you want a walkthrough or a deeper dive into those configurations. But here, as you can see, I have a strategy where I want to be able to send my customer an email. And then if they don't respond, I want to send them a series of collection letters until I block their account. So this function, collections process automation or collections process setup, works in conjunction with your collection letter sequence that you have in the background. So as you can see here, I'm telling the system that days in relation to my invoice due date, I want to send the collection letter when it's a day past due, or send the email. And then I want to send the collection letter when it's 2, 3, and 4 days. I put 2, 3, and 4 days just for sake of the demonstration. Ideally, this would be something where it's 10 days or 5 days, depending on whatever it is your policy that you have for your customer. Okay. So what you're going to see here is I'm going to process these in the background again, and you'll see how the collection letters or the email and the collection letter notifications come through to my email. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm just going to go and show you guys my customer that I'm going to be working with here. So the customer I'm going to be working with is Honest Repair Service. If I go to their transactions, they have an invoice that was due yesterday for $2,599.99. So basically what I want to do is I want to have my collections process automation function trigger to look at this a day after the invoice is due. And so part of the demonstration purposes when it comes to the collections process automation is that it has to happen on the day of. So here on 11/20, you can see in terms of my preparation, I've had to do some testing to make that happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click edit here, and I'm just going to change this to run at 1:40 a.m. So in this case, because that happened in the background, it's going to automatically occur. And we'll just click finish and update. So now we have this guy scheduled and ready to go. And pretty soon this will update to executing. And when that executes, what we expect to see in the view process history is I'm expecting to receive an email that tells me that the invoice has been received. So just bear with me while I open up my email, but don't give everyone all the details to what's happening. All right, let me hit refresh. So now you can see that's executing already. And just like that, my email has been sent. So again, not something that we want to necessarily trigger for our users to have to do. As you can see, the system just does it automatically. Now, I do have to make a mention in terms of the collections email template in standard D365. It does not have placeholders. So that is something that you would have to do a small modification to have the email template leverage placeholder functionality for the collection letter email template. So if you wanted to say like the dear customer's name in here, instead of just something vanilla like customer, you wanted to put their past due invoice ID and the invoice due date and the past due balance, things like that. You do have to do a slight modification within the email template or within electronic reporting in order to leverage that particular functionality. But as you can see here, the most important takeaway is that when I ran my collection letter, when I ran my collections process automation, it generated that email for me immediately. So now, 5 days later, 10 days later, whatever your scenario may be, you may have that situation come up again where the customer has not paid their balance. And if the customer hasn't paid their balance, then you want to send them a collection letter. And the same thing applies here. So what I'm going to do in terms of testing purposes is I'm just going to change this invoice so that the due date is now on the 18th, which is technically 2 days later. So now when I come back to my collections process automation, again, this is not something that you would be doing manually. This would just be your collections process is going to run daily. And when those customers' invoices reach that threshold of when they're past their invoice due date, the system just automatically kicks off the batch process here, and it automatically will send the information to your customer. So what is going to happen in this particular case now is I'm going to be having this scheduled batch job that's going to run here in just a minute or so, and it's going to create a new collection letter for me. And this is when I mentioned that the collections process setup works in conjunction with your collection letter number sequence. I'm going to show you what's going to happen here in the background. So while this is executing, let's just make sure that's been kicked off. Not quite yet. Cool. While that's getting ready to do that, what I wanted to show was the system takes into account your collection letter sequence setup. So, oh, and that's not the right company. Let's go there. So as you can see here, I have a collection letter and I'm charging a fee for each one. So when I get to my third collection letter, this is going to block the customer. It's going to put their account on hold and basically send them to collections. So now you can see the view process history. This step has been completed. When I go to view process history, it shows you that a collection letter has been created. It's been created based off of the configuration that I had in the collection process setup, which is 2 days. And another part of the full autonomy of this functionality, standard functionality within the system, is that in your credit and collections area, I have it set up so that when the collection letter is created, I have it set to automatically post, because I know it's going to have the verbiage in the collection letter that I want in terms of telling the customer that they have a past due amount. It's going to generate a fee, and it's going to capture the invoice that I have associated with it. So this is not something that I, as a collection agent with your company, needs to process or review, because the system is already tracking all of that information. The last piece is maybe you want to have your collection letters sent at the end of the day. You can create a batch job in the print area to run at the end of the day for all your collection letters so that they run and send to your customers. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to print this to screen just to give you a visual of what your customer would receive. So if you have the batch job set up to run for the collection letter printing to email at the end of the day, you can have this put in here. Oh, that shouldn't be posting twice. But nonetheless, you can see what the functionality is doing is it's allowing you to be able to take that customer or take that customer's invoices and process them through. And then I can do and repeat the same thing 2 more times. And basically what that will do is that will put my customer on hold, because it'll run a collection letter 2, and then it'll put the customer on collection. So we'll do that. Does anybody have any questions about that process? Okay,
No
so here,
questions on collections that are in the chat.
awesome. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll run this one more time just to show you that basically the process will run. Let me go to my customer account and set their transaction to due on the 17th. I might be a little late, but we'll see. We'll see if we get any results. If not, then we'll move on. The last piece that I want to leave, we want to talk about as this is running in the background, is bank reconciliation. So bear with me here, and we'll see what happens with our results when this gets done executing. And if it creates a collection letter for us, then we know that we have a full end-to-end autonomous collections process in D365. So here you can see we have our next collection letter that's processed. And again, it creates the collection letter in the system and automatically posts it for us. So we'll have that capability to be able to have the system do all of that for us to free up our time, where your collections agent can now use the customer credit and collections workspace to be able to do more value-added tasks and see where their vendor or where their customers are at in terms of their payments, and adding and update or adjusting and updating their aging and seeing this at a larger scale. So you can see here now my customer has some past due invoices, and we can manage the customers and do these tasks here in the system while the system does the communication for us to the customers. And it can do that on a large scale, in this case, not just one customer. Okay, the last piece here as we wrap up in our last 25 minutes is to talk about the, oh, not that slide, is to talk about our bank reconciliation in standard D365. So if you're not familiar with the different formats within D365, there's 3 standard formats: the BAI2 file, MT940, and CAMT053. BAI2 is your standard, mostly North American file format used by all the major US banks. Regional banks can have multiple files or multiple bank statements in one file. Your MT940 is predominantly used in Latin America, at least for a lot of the clients that I have worked with in the past, but it's also a worldwide standard. And then lastly, your CAMT053 is used in Europe as well as Australia. And this is probably has the most information in terms of reference numbers, customer bank account, customer bank transaction types, and things that can help you more or less automate the process in D365. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about here is in D365, depending on the format that you receive, gives you the different availability of fields that you can match on. So for example, all of them will be able to match on a different transaction type. They'll be able to find verbiage in your statement. But the CAMT053 that I found out has information tied more or less to the customer's bank account or the customer's invoice numbers, and it's able to match very easily on that. So we'll use that example today. I've used BAI2 in the past, but in this case, one of the key features that I want to highlight is the ability to generate customer payment transactions from your bank statement. So again, kind of looping it all together, when you think about the customer or the collections process, maybe your customer makes payments directly to your bank and those payments just show up on your bank statement and you don't necessarily receive a physical check in the system. Well, with the advanced bank reconciliation, particularly when you use a CAMT053 file, the system will have that banking information in the file. The file will have that banking information. And if you have your customer's bank information set up in the system, now you have the ability to generate payments, whether they be resolving an invoice number or they are doing a payment on account as a prepayment of some sort. You have that capability and that flexibility when you're using a CAMT053 account. And that's one of the things I'm going to show you today. Unfortunately, with the BAI2 file, when you want to be able to identify like a customer's invoice, for example, you would have to do some changes or some updates to the electronic reporting format within D365 in order to capture that stuff. And then the last thing that I want to talk about before I get into the demonstration is that you have the ability to speed up your reconciliation process because of the different matching rules that you can account for a number of different transaction types within the system. And that's what we're going to go through today, is to show you how, with the payment that I just processed for the vendor, I have an existing invoice for a customer for an amount, and I have a customer that's going to be making a payment for a prepayment that's going to come directly in the bank statement. We want to be able to have the system recognize that and pull all that information in automatically for us. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with being able to send this information into D365 automatically. So again, the whole point of the automation is to be able to close this out and go back and go back, is to be able to have the system bring the bank statement in automatically and not having us have to upload it. So bear with me here while I get ready to send one more email to myself. Let's copy that. Let's hit the back arrow there. Let's go new. We'll go. I'm just sending an email to myself here, so just bear with me, people. Let's call it that. We'll call this webinar. Attach our file. We definitely can't forget to do that. And to collections automation. Okay, so the same function, the same information applies to sending the bank statement or receiving bank statements into your system automatically. Also using a Power Automate workflow to do that. In this case, I'm just sending it to my email, but there are trigger points. Instead of having it go from email, you can have it track an SFTP site. That's most likely how your bank is going to send your bank statements to you, is through an SFTP folder that you can then pick that statement up and send it to your, or usually import it manually into your system. In this particular case, we are instead of manually picking it up and sending it to the system, we have our system, check our SFTP site, use our Power Automate workflows to pull that into our SharePoint, and then the system is going to be able to run a batch job to pull that into D365. So just bear with me here, and let me go into. So here you can see this simulates my SFTP site, if you will. Is basically my email that has it coming into the system. So this is my newest email that has my bank statement. So my goal is to bring that bank statement into D365. Okay, so just bear with me here. And let's go into D365. So once again, I have a batch job running in the background. And it's a combination. Let me go to my batch jobs. Auto import bank statements. As you can see, this is set to run at 123, but we're just going to change that to basically run right now. So we'll just change that to run as of yesterday and hit save. Oh, wait, let me make sure. Hang on. Might not have anything because I may have forgot to do make sure it got over to my SharePoint site. Moving a little too fast. Let's go into bank statement. Okay, I moved very quickly. So as you can see, it went to my I sent it to the email. My Power Automate flow worked in the background really quickly, and it sent it to my SharePoint, and my batch job picked it up. So now you can see I have my third statement here that's got my opening balance, my ending balance. When I click into the details of the statement ID, I have my net amount, and I have my transactions that have come in. So I have a transaction here that's going to account for that vendor payment that you guys saw me do about a half hour ago. You have what's called a customer payment on account, and I put these descriptions in here just so we can have a reference to them. I have the customer payment itself. So this is an invoice that this customer has. So what I want the system to be able to do is I want the system to settle this invoice. So I have this customer, design and department stores. If I go to my customers and show you, this customer has an open invoice of $20,000 that we want to be able to pay. That invoice has the reference number here. So I have my matching rules configured in the background to be able to look at whether this is I want you to generate a payment for me, I want you to settle an invoice, or I want you to match on a check or some type of other transaction. And you can have other rules in place like bank fees. That's a common one where your bank automatically charges you a fee because of maintenance and so on. Then you'll be able to have a rule that says when you see that transaction type come in here, like I think it's a 694, 698, if I'm not mistaken, you can have the system automatically create the transaction. So what we'll do here, once this comes into the system, now you just come in and you have an opportunity to validate. So we get passive validation, we confirm it. It lets us know that this process has passed validation and confirmation. And now we have 3 unmatched lines, and now we're ready to process our bank statement. We have the related, it does not have a related worksheet yet. So we could click on here. Oh, that should be, but I put that to statement number 3. Oops, we'll see if this lets us process. I forgot to update the ID. Yeah, well, we'll see. Hopefully it lets us reconcile. Okay, so let's go to worksheet. And as you can see here, we can ignore these other transactions, these other bank transactions. What we're focusing on is we can see that we have a 475, so I could easily manually match these, and that would match here. But you can see this $20,000 debit and $10,000 transactions are not in my system, right? They're not associated with these. You can ignore these, okay? And so the whole idea is that I want the system to do this matching for me. I don't want to have to come in here and search line by line to find each one. So when the bank statement gets imported and I create my I create my worksheet, now I can run my matching rules. And basically what I'm expecting to happen is I'm expecting to see a payment journal, 2 payment journals get created, and this vendor check payment get matched. So I run my rules that has my matching rules set that has all of my different matching rules that have been configured in the background. I can also have this run in a batch. So if I receive my bank statement in the morning from the bank, I can have the process run at night once I have it all set up, or I can have it run during the day or whatever the case may be. So let me just run this right now. And this will just take a minute because I'm not going to run it in batch. It might even not take that long. Okay, so now we have 5 different rules. Surprisingly, that didn't match, but I was expecting to see this 1219 match. I'm not really sure why it didn't, but nonetheless, what I like to see, or what I want to highlight here, is the matching rule for 195 and 165 is executed. And basically what this has done is this has created and posted a customer payment journal for those 2 transactions for us. So once we have those 2 transactions in place, you can see if I go over to my matched transactions, the system has automatically created these payment journals for me. Let me close and make that smaller. Good. So you can see the system has automatically matched my 2 payment transactions from my customers. And one of them will settle the invoice in here. This transaction right here will automatically settle the invoice associated with that particular customer. Again, I'm not sure why this didn't match. So we'll just do it manually so I can show the end-to-end process for right now. Kind of defeats the purpose, I understand, but sometimes you do have to work around a little bit. Okay, so now we have this all matched up. We want to reconcile our bank statement. So once that reconciliation is complete, I can click the refresh button and you can see that my invoice for my customer that was open is now settled. So I haven't even had to worry about creating the payment journal, because when my customer paid their account or paid their invoice within the bank, maybe their customer portal or something like that, the system brought it in and managed it through my bank reconciliation. So now we have a complete end-to-end process when it comes to bringing the bank statement in. We are able to validate and confirm that bank statement. Once we do that, we can have the system automatically run the matching rules through a batch job. So now all we're doing is just reviewing and validating the lines that are not matched, where we want to be able to have an 85, 90% hit rate in terms of our matching rules, and only having to deal with 1 or 2, hopefully no more than 5 transactions on your statement that may need some investigation if they're not automatically matched. One of the other features that I didn't highlight today, but I want to call out, is you have the capability to do summarized transactions. So in D365, if your payment journal, let me just go in here into journal names. Your payment journal has the capability on a vendor and or customer payment, depending on how your bank processes those payments. You have the ability to use this summarize amounts in bank account. And what this allows you to do is, if you turn this on, oh, I got to create a number sequence. Not going to do that on the fly. But if you turn this on, you have some functionality in here that allows you to summarize a series of banks transactions or vendor payment or customer payment transactions, so that instead of 3 or 4 different transactions that show up on your bank statement, maybe your bank processes them in a batch, or when you send them in one batch. It lumps them all together. You can use this feature in conjunction with the advanced bank reconciliation process, so that if your bank does batch all your transactions together, the system is still able to recognize those transactions as a batch instead of individually, which can also cause some reconciliation headaches when you're dealing with bank reconciliation processes. So the advanced bank rec allows you to have this function as well that ties into it, coupled with the ability to manage your bank statements here within the system. So let's put the bow on things for our last 10 minutes and hopefully open it up for some Q&A. The main thing that we want to be able to show is that you have matching rules to minimize your bank transactions by an end user, or at least minimize the matching. So that way, like you just saw me do, out of the 3 transactions, 2 of them got matched, and I had to manually match 1 of them. If you take that same ratio, you know, with 30 transactions, ideally you only have a handful of transactions if you have to manually match them. But ideally, when you have the matching rules in place for customer payments, being able to settle invoices, tracking your vendor payments, and also tracking and creating transactions for bank fees, you will have a pretty autonomous bank reconciliation process in terms of taking that bank statement from a SFTP site, having your matching rules, and then having your Power Automate flow bring it into D365 automatically, and then having your matching rules configured so that the system can automatically match those transactions based on what you have set up. And now when you have this automated matching occur and your bank reconciliation process gets sped up and it's way more accurate, now you have the capabilities to properly like forecast and plan, plan your cash levels in your bank, in your bank subledger, you know, on a daily basis, weekly or monthly basis, depending on how you do it. So with that being said, those are all the presentations or demonstrations I wanted to show. And to recap, we talked about OCR, AP, invoice automation, and being able to bring some of that stuff in an end-to-end process. We showed how you can use collections process to communicate to your customers autonomously and allow your collections agents to do more value-added tasks throughout their day instead of having to continually follow up with customers who miss payments. And then lastly, we talked about your advanced bank reconciliation functions that allow you to bring your bank statement in and be able to match transactions with minimal user intervention. If anyone doesn't have any questions, that will be the end of my presentation.
We have one remaining question in the chat from the AP automation section. It's
Sure.
from Brian. Brian asked, question on allocation of charges. Let's say you have additional charges on your invoice, example, shipping fees. The invoice reads this and allocates them as charges. Is there a way to have the system automatically allocate the charges to all invoice lines, or are we stuck doing this manually?
That's a good question, Brian. I'd have to look into that. So if you have the charges that come in and it recognizes them and then allocate them to the individual lines, I'd have to look into that and do some testing to see how that occurs.
Okay, got it. Thank you for the question, Brian. There's no other questions in the chat. If anyone has any lingering questions they'd like to drop in, we can address them in the next minute or so. You know what? While I got you, Brandon, I had a question or two of myself.
Sure.
So you touched on the existing email template for collections in D365 and how they leave something to be desired in terms of like personalization. How difficult is it to modify those emails to make them a little bit more personalized?
So they're not overly difficult. It's just you just do have to do the modification. Ideally, what you normally see, and let me see if I can pull this up. What you normally see, at least when it comes to the email templates, depending on the email templates, you have those built-in placeholders where all it is you put your % and you put the name and whatnot. But when it comes to this one, it's not overly complex. It's just that you need a developer to go in and kind of do that in the background. So it's not an arduous task, and it's not something that's going to take a long time to put together, but it is something that you do have to do for the collections email template. I'm not sure why Microsoft hasn't updated that in D365 just yet because you, you have that capability when you use email templates. For example, when you have the DocCentric add-in, you can have those exact same email templates that are applicable, and it's definitely much more personalized. But when it comes to doing the modification in D365, it's not challenging. It's just more or less inconvenient.
Got it. Thank you for giving some more clarity on that. And no additional questions in the chat. I had one just to maybe end us off, which is why do you think more organizations don't take advantage of these out-of-the-box automation capabilities and instead kind of seek like third-party solutions instead?
Number one, I think that they don't necessarily know about the full functionality of them. And depending on what you're testing, it can get a little frustrating because, for example, the bank reconciliation, the Microsoft documentation focuses on the BAI2 format. Yet it tells you that you can do customer payments, you can match invoices and so on, but it doesn't tell you that you can't do that in a BAI2 file because a BAI2 file, the transaction detail is kind of limited. It tells you the date, it tells you the amount, the transaction type, and maybe the check number if you're using checks. Not a lot of people are using checks, so there's a reference number there, and then there's a notes field. In the BAI2 file, there's nowhere to match like the reference or notes information in D365 to create that matching. In a CAM-T053 file, you can, because a CAM-T053 file, which I'll just bring up here in my example. So here, and I found some frustration with this, right? So here is the, let's see, where is it? Here's the invoice, the transaction that I settled. So I had a rule in D365 that said, I need you to find this reference number. Here is my customer's bank account, and here's my customer's bank name. So I have this also set up in D365. And so because I have this set up in this CAM-T053 file, the system was able to find it. It was able to find the invoice, and it was able to apply that transaction to the customer. In a BAI2 file, and that's because these CAM-T053, these ISO, they have designated fields that tell you this is a remittance information, and this is the related debtor agent's financial institution, which is their bank account. In a BAI2 file, you don't have that information. So I have an amount here. I have the day that it's available, which is immediately I have an invoice, but this is a reference. This is like a bank reference number. It's not a customer reference number, and it's not the remittance information that we're trying to remit against the payment. So that becomes frustrating. So if the Microsoft documentation only tells you, it gives you details about a BAI2 file, but it doesn't tell you, oh yeah, by the way, this information can only be matched in your rule based on data that's in a CAM-T053, you're going to spend a lot of time messing around with it, and you're not really, it's going to be frustrating. You're going to be like, you know what, let me go call SK Global because theirs is a little more intuitive. So I had to troubleshoot around and deal with that when it came to my rules. So when it came to my advanced bank rec rules, let me go to my reconciliation matching rules and just show you before we finish off. So here I can tell the system I want my invoice balance and it should match. And then here are my financial details. I want you to find my, on this default method of payment, create a customer payment journal. On this one, for example, I want you to find my transaction code. I want you to create the customer account and so on. So you have some things in here where it allows you to be able to it's when you don't know that stuff and you have to dig around and find it, it can make it frustrating. And that's mostly why people most likely don't use it.
That certainly makes sense. Thank you so much for shedding light in this entire presentation. I think it was really insightful. We actually do have one last question that just got dropped in the chat talking about bank rec. Please, can someone advise which is best route, SK or Microsoft D365 bank rec? Pros and cons, very much helpful to present to business process owner.
Okay, so Pros and cons. So one of the pros in terms of D365 and using advanced bank rec is some of the stuff that I showed you. Number one, it's built into the system. You have capabilities to create your matching records or your matching rules and so on. And it works like directly kind of in one unified area. Um, Other pros is that you have the modern bank reconciliation layout. So the statement that I showed you, and when we processed it in the worksheet, when you go into the details, you can see, what's been matched, what hasn't. You have some good visuals in terms of being able to see what this looks like in your worksheet. And then lastly, when I go to bank reconciliation, and we go to my reconcile, and just want to show you, this is kind of what you're working with when it comes to bank reconciliation, right? And again, it just kind of gives you a nice full layout of details. When it comes to now the cons in terms of this is kind of like I said before, right? Is you have to know which transactions are going to match and how they're going to match, and that can make it challenging, especially when there's not a whole lot of guidance for the other payment or the other file formats like an MT940 and a CAMT53. So you have to do a lot of troubleshooting. You have to do a lot of hit or miss and self-teaching until you kind of get it right. And that could just make it challenging. It can make it very frustrating. But once you get it right, as you saw here, it works kind of seamlessly. Now, SK Global, they're it's a treasury management software, and so they have a lot of different tools and functions that make it a lot more flexible. They have numerous file formats that make it very easy to match you don't have to you have to create your matching rules, but you don't have to find the right file format within the system in order to have your transactions get matched accordingly. And that goes for banking file formats, so like your MT53, or your MT940, your CAMT53, and they have it across all bank accounts. So for example, we have SK Global in here because it's an ISV that we collaborate with. So in their Treasury Automation Suite, for example, you have you have electronic bank rec file formats, right? And you can create them, and they have them built into the system already, right? And you don't have to use electronic reporting to get the format. You just tell the system this is the format that I'm using, and you define the um, the ending balance, and then you just set up your transaction type. So you have the transaction type set up and the matching rules, and they're in there, and it's pretty detailed. And the documentation that they give you is second to none when it comes to every single field, what its purpose is, what its function is. And then you have a process within the D365. So you have a couple of different areas, or you have this particular area in the process bank statements form. Let me find it for you. When it creates your bank statements for you, process bank statements. So this is an interface. Sorry. This is an interface that allows you to be able to manage your bank reconciliations. Let me go into another environment just to give you an idea of what I mean. And so the pros is that the SK Global function, it's a lot more intuitive. It's very straightforward. They have a designated process when it comes to configuring and setting up all the different things that you need to set up and the steps that it takes to get there. And then lastly, just like you saw, I had to configure Power Automate and tie that to the workflow and use Power Apps. Their middleware, which is called Bank Fabric, is a lot more intuitive, and it's a very more straightforward process where you basically get your source from the bank. So for example, your channel, like an SFTP folder or something like that, and you're able to connect that directly into the system, into their application, and the sending of the bank file, it just works, right? It goes directly to the bank. You can get a response back right away, whereas being able to have to do that in D365 can be a little clunky because you have to work with a couple of different applications to make that happen. And then, the cons in terms of SK Global, I think, is just that it's a separate application that you have to manage and work through the implementation process. Not really a bad con. It's just part of it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you for the breakdown, Brandon. Hope that answers your question, Anil. And if anyone has any lingering questions, feel free to reach out to us via the website, avantiico.com. You can also reach us via email. Thank you so much for your time and for hanging with us to learn more about finance automation. And thank you, Brandon.
My pleasure. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you all for your attention, and thanks for joining. Hope to talk to you all soon.